everybody. Welcome to another Kubefirst Live. It's been a month. We had to skip the last one 2 weeks ago, and I did not miss being on a live stream with John, but I missed the countdown music. I'll miss it so much. I don't know what it is with that sound. Joke aside, I'm just picking on John. Super excited about the show today because we have one of our friends back, Andy. Welcome to the show again. Thanks for coming back and talk to us about awesome things you're doing. How is life?
Life is good. Thanks for having me back. I have to say, I greatly enjoyed the countdown music as well. I don't know if you can see me while it's going, but I was kind of dancing over here.
It is surprisingly snappy, isn't it? It's just you're not ready for it, and then here it comes in full force. It's a good one.
It is. And John, I hope you didn't take my joke personally. How is life, my man?
Fred, I would never. And life has truly never been better. I loving what's going on at the shop. We're real excited for the build up going into Navigate next month. A whole bunch of company announcements that I am gonna do my best to just keep my lips sealed on. But man, I just feel like I'm about to explode with all of it. We've been growing, we've been building. The team is incredible. I'm on cloud 9. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, I know. That's like the only annoying thing of working at Kubefirst right now is that we have all those amazing things and like we cannot talk about them right now. But soon, in a month-ish, we're gonna be able to talk about those things, and we're just excited. As John said,
tease me like this.
So I know, it's such a rude.
No, John. Touch based a little bit in the latest blog post I share, like just touch a little bit about like, hey, things are coming, things are changing, we're going in a specific direction. Like Kubefirst is growing, as you may have seen if you follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. I shared a picture of the team, like just the team in itself. We double in numbers in the last 4 months.
Yeah, and then doubled again. Yeah, we're doing just great things. It's really exciting.
It is. But today's show is not about like what's next for Kubefirst. It's not about us. It's about Andy and Polaris. So the first time we came to the show, we talked about one of your open source project, Goldilocks. If I remember well, it was like more about like resource management and like managing request limits and just awesome, and something that I feel like people should use to have better management of their Kubernetes resources. But today, we're also going to talk about an interesting topic with another open source project, Polaris, which is a policy engine, if I'm not wrong and I'm not mixing live stream together.
Nope, you got it perfectly right. Polaris is an open source policy engine. So just like Goldilocks, it was created to, is that my Twitter handle on there? Man, I haven't logged into Twitter in a while. That might not be the best place to reach me, but feel free to mention me. Anyway, so Polaris was born out of our experience running clusters for our customers. So we run Kubernetes clusters in people's infrastructure for them, build, maintain, secure the whole life cycle of Kubernetes and all the add-ons. And what we found was we didn't break people's clusters, but they broke their clusters. So like when we would have a major outage or we'd get paged for something, probably 8-9 times out of 10, it was because a customer had deployed something that broke something. Either it, didn't have resource requests and limits, so it, blew up a node because it consumed all the memory really fast, or whatever it was, or it was hammering the API server for some reason because it was making API server requests, or whatever it was. So at the time, this was 6 years ago, I think. So quite a long time ago. And really, like, OPA was this brand new thing. Nobody had ever heard of it. We looked at it. We tried to write Rego. We failed at writing Rego. Everyone bashes on Rego. I actually kind of like Rego now, I'll be honest. I see the value in it, but it is definitely a steep learning curve to get Rego. So we put together, we said, what can we do to validate what people are doing in their clusters? So we came up with the idea of a policy engine, basically before anybody had built a policy engine other than OPA. And so, the folks, I wasn't actually involved in writing this one. So a couple other folks, some people may be familiar with Rob Scott. He works at Google now on API Gateway. He came up with this idea, so hopefully he doesn't mind me name dropping him here. But we said, why don't we validate stuff before it gets in the cluster? We have this validating and mission controller concept coming, so let's make use of that. And so the most obvious way at the time was, hey, we have YAML. YAML is a subset of JSON. Let's use JSON schema. It's built for validating schemas. And so we extended JSON schema and built Polaris to check for misconfigurations in the cluster, enforce best practices, and things like that. So that's kind of where Polaris came from, why it exists. And to this day, it's just been, continuously improved and added to our commercial product. It reports and it can report into our commercial product, and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the history of Polaris.
Right on. Yeah. And just, for Kubefirst users in the audience, we've long been, I don't want to say that we're anti-policy. There's just a line of what we're trying to do with the Kubefirst foundational platform. Right. And everything beyond that line is like our end users' responsibility. It's their day two implementation that they need to figure out what they're protecting, how they're securing things, how they're providing governance over their Kubernetes resources, which is very like snowflake, from company to company. You're going to want to protect different things. You're going to want to verify different things depending on what it is that you're trying to protect and why. So we have a couple policy engines in the GitOps catalog. Polaris is available in the GitOps catalog. So all our Kubefirst users, if you go over to the GitOps catalog, you'll be able to just click the install button for Polaris and get a relatively vanilla install, but an install that's backed by GitOps in your GitOps repo. Applies it to your management cluster. You could extend that into your workload clusters if you wanted. Excuse me, but everything that Andy's showing in Polaris today, one click away for all the Kubefirst users. So hope you'll check it out. Even though we don't regularly talk about policy at Kubefirst, it is very important to your architecture. And Polaris is another great open source option to get that added to your ecosystem. So Andy, I don't know if you have anything that you can sort of show us about the nuts and bolts of how Polaris is implemented and how you can use it. Definitely.
So I do have, there's great documentation for Polaris. It's on polaris.docs.fairwinds.com. But the easiest way, if you're not using the GitOps catalog, but if you're on Kubefirst, use the GitOps catalog. But if you're not, very easy to install via Helm into your cluster. The other thing Polaris can do is run as a CLI. So if you just want to like kick the tires on it, see what it can report on, see what it does, the CLI is probably the best way to get started. So I have here a sandbox CKS cluster that I play around with all the time. It's got all kinds of crap running in it. I have no idea what's in here. And so I'm just gonna show you kind of what the Polaris command can do. So if we just run Polaris, you'll get some options here. The main command we want right now is audit. So this will run a one-time audit of your cluster, and it has a whole bunch of options. And if you run it by itself, it'll output a whole lot of information that you may or may not care about. And so we'll skip over that, and I'll show the help here in just a second. And it by default spits out JSON, so don't worry about that either. We'll work on getting a little bit better output here. Quite a lot of options. So we can audit a path. So if you have a bunch of static YAML in your repo, you can just audit that. And then you can also just in the command line specify what checks you want to run. So if you just want to check your whole cluster for one specific little thing, you can do that. I'll talk about what checks are built in here in a minute. Let's see. A lot of this is for just like how we display things. So the thing that I want is format pretty. So let's do an audit, and we'll dash format pretty. And then I'm going to do that audit path thing. So in this repo, I have a whole bunch of templated out manifests for all of the various add-ons that are running in this cluster. So this is just a whole pile of YAML in here. It's like a GitOps repo, right? So I'll run audit format pretty audit path. And what we'll get, if I scroll back up here, is a semi-pretty output of all the different checks that we're running. So we check for lots of different stuff. Here is a role that allows execing into a pod. That's something that could be potentially dangerous that you may want to block. This role here passes that check because it doesn't allow execing into a pod. So we have a whole lot of successes here because we actually do try to configure things relatively securely. But the Argo CD repo server role allows pod exec. So that may be something I want to take a look at. There's a lot of this RBAC stuff, so I'm going to keep scrolling. In fact, that's all of it right now. I'm not sure why that is. But that's a quick way just to run a few checks, use the default config, kick the tires on Polaris. There's a bunch of different output formats. You can do JSON, you can do YAML. If you want to dump it into a CSV, I think we can do that for some reason. I don't know why. But then let's talk a little bit about the checks that it runs. So out of the box, we have 3 categories of checks: security, efficiency, and reliability. Efficiency is my favorite one because this was the original use case for it. And it kind of ties back to Goldilocks because this is what, this concept is what led to creating Goldilocks, which was we said, set your CPU requests and limits. And people said, what do we set them to? And that was the whole story.
I bet.
So this is how we started enforcing that. We say, you need to have CPU and memory requests and CPU and memory limits. So that's the out of the box check. It's documented here. But if we go look at security, we have, basically all the pod security standards are in here. And we've got, other things as well. Linux hardening check, host PID, insecure capabilities, right? To check your, your Linux capabilities. If you have an ingress that doesn't have TLS, we can check for that. But basically you can check any Kubernetes object because we're just doing JSON schema.
Right.
If we go look in the repo at Polaris, we can find the checks if I remember where they are.
Have you seen that, John? Andy is zooming right away.
I saw the smile on your face while he was doing it too. It was incredible.
Oh, that's great. Actually, let me go find.
While you do that, I just want to say hi to Divi. Thanks for joining the live stream.
All right. So in the package config checks, which is linked from the documentation under custom checks, you can find all the different checks we have. So we'll take a fairly straightforward one, run as root allowed. This is a, fairly common check. It's part of pod security standards. We don't want to let containers run as root. And so we have here basically JSON schema inside of YAML. Yes, I know that's a little weird. It's not as bad as you think. It's really not too terrible.
Can you zoom just a little bit?
Oh,
please?
yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's probably too much. There we go. So we set a target. We say we're going to target a container. We're going to look at containers within a pod spec. And then we have our schema. So we set some definitions here. This is a security context that should pass. This is a good security context. And we say run as user is required. It has to be at least one, right? Because you don't want to run as the root user. And then we also require the field run as non-root. So there's 2 ways. This one's a little bit trickier than I remembered because you have to say run as root, run as non-root, true. And then you also have to say, you should say run as user and give it a user ID, right?
Yeah.
So we have both of those in here. And so it gets a little funky. It's JSON schema. There are tools out there to help you write JSON schema. That's also part of the reason we picked JSON schema, because it is a fairly well-known thing that you can look up, get advice on, right? It's not a custom DSL that we wrote that you now have to go learn and we have to maintain all the documentation for.
Right.
JSON schema is defined. What we do is we give you these helpers. This target container allows you to say this JSON schema is targeting just the container spec within that pod. So you don't have to write the whole JSON schema for the whole, like for every deployment, every cron job, everything that might create a pod. You just have to write JSON schema that validates the container itself. And then I will note, I'm not going to go through every line of this because nobody wants me to do that, but I will add, we have added the ability to do mutations as well. So we have another custom field down here that says mutations. And we use, I don't remember what it's, I think it's a YAML patch spec. And so we say add security context run as non-root true. So if you enable mutations in the Polaris controller, anytime a container comes in, it will do this mutation on that container. So we have the mutating admission as well.
Right on. And in terms of policy enforcement, what is the feedback to the end user when a policy is violated? Other than obviously pod's not going to deploy, the admission controller says no way. Do you have any other what should you be watching as a platform engineer? What's the right thing to be monitoring in terms of knowing if policies are being attempted and are in violation? Like, is there a user interface anywhere that you can get feedback or?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple. We think of policy enforcement in 3 places.
Okay.
We do. Turn my little light on. We talk about it in terms of shift left with the developer. So we have CI/CD, right? So with that, you can plug in Polaris into your CI/CD pipeline, have it scan that YAML, generate a report like this, and then there are some options for making that a little bit easier. So you can say set exit code on danger, set exit code below score. So we generate a score based on how many passing policies and how many failing policies you have. So you can say every time this runs, it has to have a score of at least 85, right? Or you have a baseline score that you've checked. And so if the score decreases at all, it fails the check. You could also just say, and you can also have it only output failed tests, which is helpful for CI/CD output, right? I don't need to see every test that passes. I just want to see the ones that fail.
Yep.
And then we also allow you to pass in a Helm chart as a whole and a values file. So you can kind of plug Polaris into your CI/CD process wherever you want. And whenever you make a pull request, right, then if Polaris fails, it fails the pull request. So that's the first place. The second place we talk about is at admission time, which is what I think you were, primarily alluding to here. We do have the ability to warn versus fail. So you can generate warnings, which will get spit out to the end user attempting to bypass or attempting to violate a policy, shall we say, or a policy set to warn, right? And then really, admission controller management is probably a whole nother topic for an entire webinar, but there's lots of different ways to monitor that. And you could also use our commercial product, which I will very briefly plug, which Polaris reports directly into, and then you get a whole UI that shows you all your failed admission requests and why they failed and all this fancy stuff. So totally a commercial option. And then the last thing, in cluster, you can run Polaris in your cluster. So I have Helm installed Polaris here just quickly from the quick start. There is a dashboard running. And actually, let me run the Helm install again. And we will show the output of that. It's a fairly straightforward install. It really does just run that dashboard. And so we can port forward to that I could put an ingress in front of it just as easily. But if we go take a look at the dashboard, what we will see is what's happening when I hit that dashboard. Polaris is actually just going to run an audit on the fly and then parse it and put it into this dashboard for you. So if you want a quick and easy way to just view things in your cluster, you can pull up the dashboard. It's got links to the docs in it. It gives you that score. So this is how many checks passed. This is how many failed. This is how many were a warning status.
Yep.
Gives you a grade because we all love being graded. A little bit of information about your cluster. And then it'll also warn you if you have exemptions, because you can configure exemptions in Polaris, which I can talk about as part of the centralized config.
You even got the weather.
Yes, we do. I don't know what it means. Well, smooth sailing, right? We're Fairwinds. Gotta have a sailing. Yep. So we'll summarize them by category, and then really like we just give you all the checks. Now, what I like to do is filter that down by namespace, because I don't want to see every namespace in my cluster, because I'm probably not responsible for every namespace in my cluster.
Yep.
So maybe I go grab my demo app, Yelp here, hit apply, and it will rerun the audit with a namespace filter on it.
Okay.
And spit that back out at me. You can also do that via URL parameter. But now we have a much smaller list of things. This is all the objects in the cluster. So I have a config map that doesn't have any sensitive stuff in it. But I do have a Redis server that only has one replica. That's an old check that should be fixed. It does not have a pod disruption budget. That's a problem. We should probably have that.
Yeah.
Although with only one replica, that might get a little funky. We're auto mounting service count token. That's something we don't really need to do probably for this. Network policy, we should have one of those. We don't have that here either because it's a demo app. Topology spread constraints. So this gives you a quick overview of all the different things. And by default, we set a lot of things to warn. So like topology spread constraints may be something that you're concerned about, but you don't want to block on. And then by default, we set things like being allowed to run as root as danger level. If you turned on the admission controller and didn't configure anything, this would block.
Okay.
So we block at danger level. We don't block at warning.
And the end user gets to configure what they consider to be danger level and warning level.
Yeah. So when we can talk definitely about configuration, I think that's the next important thing. So Polaris works a little bit differently. Go ahead.
Sorry, just before you go to that, we have a question, and I just wanted to say I really love the UI. Like I'm a CLI person, but like when I use the application like that return me a lot of outputs that like I need to process. I feel it's a little bit better. Like if I have a UI and it's easier to filter stuff. So really good job on the UI. But the question, if you can answer, I don't know if you know KubeArmor, but it's Rishi, or man Rishi. Can it be considered as an alternative for KubeArmor? Armor? How do you say that in English?
KubeArmor.
I don't know why I struggle with that word.
Somebody's gonna have to remind me. I've looked at KubeArmor in the past and I cannot remember what it does right now. Quick Google.
It's
curiously Google.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was thinking. It says runtime security enforcement. So yeah, KubeArmor is a runtime Kubernetes security engine. It uses eBPF and Linux security models for fortifying workloads based on cloud container, IoT, edge, and 5G network, and enforces policy-based controls.
Yeah, it seems like it's a slightly different layer. This is more of a alternative to like Caverno or
Opa Gatekeeper.
OPA.
Yeah, definitely. We can call it runtime security because it can run policy in the runtime, but like this is much more about lower level runtime security from what I can tell from looking at their website for 3 seconds. So I'm with you there, John.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Keep them coming. I love questions. I love answering them. So bring it on. So this is the config. What?
I was just about to guide you toward the config. I'm still curious.
Cool. So yeah, one of the big differences between Polaris and some of the other policy engines out there, like Kyverno, is it does use a centralized config. This has pros and cons, right? So as a platform engineer building a platform, I can now build my whole policy config right here, say this is what's allowed, this is what's not, and these are my exemptions or exceptions.
Yep.
What that doesn't allow me to do is like hand over control of pieces of this to other people. So it doesn't split well, right? Which is the benefit of the CRD based approach. So I'll leave that up to the end user to decide which they prefer, but that is how Polaris works. So here we have just the check section. This lists every check and what level it is at. So we see here like privilege escalation allowed is a danger level check. Run as root allowed is a danger level check. GitHub stop. So you can go in and reconfigure all of this. You can also say ignore to any one of these, and then it just won't even show up in the UI here. It won't show up in your, if you run the CLI with the exact same config as you do the dashboard or the server version. And in fact, you mentioned the UI being a useful thing with all the output. You can just run the Polaris dashboard locally. So if you have access to a cluster, you can just go run Polaris dashboard. It'll fire it up on port 8080. Apple will yell at me because it wants to accept network connections. And then we can go pull up the dashboard just locally. So if you don't want to install it in your cluster, but you want to see the dashboard, you can just fire it up.
Super cool.
Nice.
And it's a nice way to test your config too, because you can point it at this config, your customized config, and it will do that.
Yeah, there is a nice argument to be made for centralized config, particularly for, maybe more so for our Kubefirst audience than most, but like, anybody that's trying to establish a new platform from scratch, from the ground up, there's just like a ton to do. We all know, right?
Right.
And if that environment that you're trying to establish requires certain compliance requirements about what is going to be allowed on your cluster ecosystem and what won't, then this model allows you to very quickly set what the rules are for the whole platform. And then you get to begin in a compliant way and go and explore. And, if you need more options from enforcement standpoint down the road, there's nothing that says you can't change it, but having a quick turnkey solution to get a set of rules applied across the board to your platform feels like it makes a lot of sense to a lot of my audience. Just a call out there. I think it's and like you said, it's pros and cons. Splitting it up as those rules become more intricate, as those rules become more as you expand into different teams, and the teams have different rules, and production is not just production, but you have 7 different productions. Certainly there's opportunity to grow, but it's a great starting point policy engine. So,
for sure. Yeah, I appreciate that call. That's a good point. And, to that point, I think when I talk about policy with folks, like, yeah, we're here to talk about Polaris, but like, I'm a co-chair of the policy working group. We talk about policy all the time. And really the biggest thing about policy is nobody's doing it. Like not as many people as you would like to think are doing it.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder it's really hard to get started. And when you're talking about building that platform from scratch, I think it's super important to think about getting some kind of policy in place up front, whether it's, blocking or not, or you're just reporting on it, or you're just blocking like 1 or 2 things, right? Like just enforce a couple of policies. It gets you into that mindset of, we are going to do this. There are going to be things that you're not allowed to do in this cluster.
Yep.
Or in this platform. And, just getting that process going early on makes it so much easier. If you don't let in things that can run as root from the beginning, you will never have to go back and fix all of your deployments to not run as root.
That's exactly right.
Just bring the pain forward, right? That old adage about DevOps, bring the pain forward, do it now. Start with a small subset, start with like half the pod security standards. Don't even use all the pod security standards. But yeah, huge fan of that. So Back to the config, we can talk about, so we can specify which things are allowed to mutate. So we only have one mutation in here by default, which is pull policy being set to always. That's a super safe one to turn on and just kind of get used to mutating stuff and test out whether it works. Very easy to do. And then we also ship a bunch of built-in exemptions. And you may raise your eyebrow a little bit at that if you're a security practitioner, perhaps. I know I do a little bit whenever I see like, oh, you're automatically exempting all of these things. But we have found that most of the things in this list are things that are part of your managed service control plane or some other control plane that you may not have control over. And it's much easier to exempt a lot of these things up front. Most of them live in Kubesystem. They are, core DNS, CSI drivers, things like that need privileged permissions, stuff like that. We've tried to be very specific about which ones we put in by default. But there are, we have the local path provisioner here because if you try to run this on a kind cluster by default, you have that local path provisioner already in place, things like that. So, but if you are planning to run this as part of your compliance program, maybe take a look through these exemptions before you deploy them out the gate. But it is important to talk about exemptions because every policy engine you will ever deploy, you need to exempt certain things. Yeah. My CSI driver has to have host access, right? My CNI needs host network access. It's just the way it needs to run. So you will have exemptions, should know how to set them. We can set exemptions based on controller name. So whatever controller that is, whether it's a stateful set, daemon set, deployment, it will find that controller by name. And then you can say specifically which rules are exempted from that. I think there might be a little bit more we can do with it. You can also do annotation-based exemptions. So you can annotate your deployment and say polaris.fairwinds.com/exempt equals true, and that will exempt it. If you are trying to run in a compliant environment, you can actually disable the ability to use annotations in the Polaris controller if you want to. Yeah. Or even better, you write a policy that blocks that annotation except in allowed places, and then you use that to control your exemptions.
Yep.
So lots of different strategies for that. But that is how we do exemptions. Awesome. Oh, and you can also exclude specifically by container name. So if you want just the core DNS container in the core DNS deployment or daemon set deployment, you can do that. So a little more granular control there.
Dig it. Well, very cool. Did you have anything else about Polaris you wanted to get on screen? I feel like you've given us a great walkthrough. Installation, super easy. You can Helm install. You can use the CLI. You can use, if you're Kubefirst, you can use the GitOps catalog to get it in. It's got a user interface that you can port forward to, or the GitOps catalog edition comes with the Ingress, so you can just hit it. You've shown us how to configure it. Comes with reasonable defaults. And if you need to adjust any of the defaults, there's a spot to go to turn the screws. I feel like I understand how to use this at Kubefirst at least. So mission accomplished from my standpoint. But if you had anything else you wanted to cover, by all means, I don't want to guide you.
No, not at all. I mean, I think I did cover it. It's not the goal with all of our tools at Fairwinds is simplicity. We built these tools to solve a specific problem that we had at a given point in time while running clusters for other people. Yep. And we're not out there always, we're not necessarily out there to build a tool that for every single use case out there. It solves a problem that we have. We make it work really well for us. If it works for you, we're really happy about that, and we would love to share it with you. We're also happy to take suggestions and pull requests and all of those things. We definitely interact with our community, but simplicity is key. And I feel like Polaris is the easiest policy engine to just walk into, try out some policies. The admission controller is relatively easy to configure as far as admission controllers go. And then, that's pretty much the majority of it. The only other thing, if you want to try out Fairwinds Insights, you can do it through Polaris. So if you want to run just a Polaris audit against a cluster and just throw those results into insights and see what our commercial product looks like, you can do that through the CLI here as well. So
super neat. Yeah, no, Fairwinds is one of the rare companies that in my view, does just true great open source work. It's not like the open source that you see so many places that's like, well, it's open source, except it doesn't work, or it's not supported, or you have to sign up for these things so that we can annoy the hell out of you. It's just true open source, great implementation. It was easy to get added into the GitOps catalog, which means that it is well designed from an installation standpoint, and ready for a GitOps shop. Definitely highly recommend policy of some sort in your platform. I couldn't agree more with Andy's advice that getting policy into your shop early is so much less friction than retroactively trying to go through and apply. But there's no wrong time to start policy. So, and Polaris gives you a great starting point with a low friction way to start assessing where you are from a policy standpoint. So, Andy, it was a great demo.
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with our audience how it all works and gets configured and everything.
Yeah, always love being on the show. It's great to see you, and appreciate all the kind words. We do really love our open source. One of the reasons I've stuck around for 6 years here, because it's just fun working on open source. So
yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right,
that's awesome. That's all echo with exactly what John said. Like, great product, and really thanks for being on the show. But gentlemen, I have a question for you. Do you know? Sorry. Do you know why was the function sad after a successful first call? Why was the function sad after a successful first call?
After a successful first call.
You can find this one. Or maybe not.
I'm mad. I don't know the answer, Fred. What's the answer?
It didn't get a call back.
Wow,
that was my humble participation to the live stream today.
Fred, we've missed you. The zingers are great. That was a fun one.
Oh, that was good. All right, appreciate it.
So, on that note, thanks again for being on the show, Andy. Always a pleasure to have you. Thanks, John, for your great questions. Always the best. You know, I can be nice too. And
crazy. I was expecting a jab, and I didn't get one.
No, sometimes I'm tired now, so maybe that's the reason. But folks, see you. We have another show planned in 2 weeks, and another great show with a great guest. That's going to be pretty amazing too, but I'm keeping the secrets until I announce it, because I'm that kind of person. So thanks for joining live. Thanks for watching the recording. If you have any question about Polaris, feel free to ask under the video. Go talk to the folks at Fairwinds, and we're going to be more than happy to help you. And if you try Kubefirst, use the GitOps catalog to install it. You're going to see it's a breeze to do so.
Definitely.
So on that note, folks, have a good rest of the day. Thanks again for joining. Thanks for being there, and see you soon.
See everybody.